All right, awesome. We should be good to go. So, hope you all had a good weekend. I got through about 4 of the 6 groups. I emailed you back your stuff. The remaining 2 I wasn't able to get done before class started. I'll get done with yours during office hours, probably, unless a lot of people come. So, the groups that haven't gotten their group work back yet should get it back pretty quickly after the end of class, I'm hoping. What I was going to do today, we're going to go over that group assignment. We'll go over the quiz. I'm trying to tidy up a few things I saw with causal arguments. Nothing too egregious or anything, just tidy up a few little details. And then we'll probably begin working on appeal to authority arguments. These are really an important kind of argumentation, probably the most important kind that we're going to talk about in terms of everyday life. An overwhelming percentage of what you believe because people told you it, to actually a kind of a disturbing extent if you actually really think about it and about how perhaps questionable the people who told you about these things were. So we're going to try to discuss this appeal to authority stuff. We're probably going to spend a pretty good chunk of time on it, actually. Probably might even go more than just this 1 week, which is fine if we need to do so. So we'll begin that today, but by no means will we finish it. We'll just get started with it. So that's my plan for the day. Does anyone have any starting questions or thoughts before we get started? All right, then let's just start with going through the group work. All right. So first question from that group assignment we looked at, so the following argument commits the post hoc fallacy. Explain why it does so. I saw a shooting star right before I aced the test. That must be what I did so well. All right, so what I was looking for in terms of an answer, this first thing, you should just define what the post hoc fallacy is, right? So the post hoc fallacy is where you would determine that one X caused Y merely because X came before Y. And in this case, did seeing the shooting star come before acing the test? Yes, it did. So it really does, this argument that really does satisfy the second criteria. It is indeed the case. I saw a couple people said this, and it was a little bit misleading. It really is the case that there's a correlation between the shooting star and acing the test. Right? And by correlation, remember, all we mean by correlation is just the events went together in some sense. They happened roughly the same time. And that's indeed what happened here. The events in this specific case went together. Now, they certainly aren't going to go together in general. My guess is that's probably what a lot of you meant on this question, because a couple of the groups actually said that they didn't think the events were even correlated. You probably meant that these events won't tend to go together in general, and you're right about that. But at least in this one specific case, they did go together. They happened at more or less the same time. They happened in very close proximity to one another. And they also happened in the right sort of temporal order. But why does it commit the fallacy then? It commits the fallacy because you can't just stop with those first 2 criteria. And indeed, every argument that really commits the post hoc fallacy, it's going to more or less make the exact same mistake, right? It will always fail the 3rd criteria. Shooting stars just aren't a plausible causal candidate to cause doing well on tests. And it's this last point that's really the key. If you missed a point on this first question, or not a full point, but if you missed a little bit on the first question, it was probably you left out this last part to some extent. That was probably why you did it. The idea of the credibility of the cause, that's sort of the key here. The post hoc fallacy, when I say that it just stops with the second criteria, what I mean by that is it doesn't actually go on to consider whether or not it's even plausible to assert a kind of causal connection between the various kinds of events. And that's why I frequently say this is sort of a question of almost like superstition or something. Like if I'm not actually saying, hey, is it really actually plausible that these two things would even go together, I'm almost certainly committing the post hoc fallacy. So I have a chat question on that one. Does this mean that correlation can depend solely on the timing then? Sure, in some specific cases, yes. If you're talking in more generalities, more of a general causal claim, maybe not in that case. But if I'm just trying to explain one specific event, yeah, the cause and the effect going near each other, that is enough to establish that they are correlated. Yeah, really all correlation just means is that they sort of go together. So the first criteria is like, did these two things happen in rough proximity to one another? The second criteria is, was the cause the first of them? I hope that helps with that chat question. Any other questions on this first question? Like I said, the big thing, and again, this is sort of a common thing that I'm going to say again and again and again. A lot of people just didn't go into enough depth in their answer. With all of these questions, when we're looking at all this inductive stuff, the explanation is really the key. So make sure you just go into sort of sufficient level of depth with your answer. Any other questions on that first one? All right, let's turn to the second one then. Right. So again, this may be helpful to get even clearer what we mean about the relationship between correlation and causation. So the following argument confuses a correlation between events with causation. You had to first identify what the actual cause is, and then say how the actual cause explains the apparent, not even the apparent, the real correlation, but not the actual causal relationship. And this was actually based on a real article that I read once. It was one that was very quickly retracted, but many years ago when I was younger. I read an article where someone had noticed, hey, football teams that wear lighter colors, they're way more likely to win than football teams that wear darker colors. It must be the case, it's sort of weird, it's sort of surprising to the person, right? But it must be the case that wearing the lighter colors is in some way correlated and indeed causally related to winning, right? This is not just correlated, but correlated. It actually makes you win. And so they then went on, because this was a surprising result, right? They went on to then posit what the sort of causal mechanism might be. They sort of speculated, well, maybe it's that if you wear darker colors, you get hotter, right? So maybe the teams that wear the darker colors tended to just get hotter, particularly maybe if they're playing in southern states that tend to be hotter states in general. And so maybe that's why the lighter teams, the teams wearing lighter colors just don't get as tired because their jerseys don't absorb heat as quickly. But people did a little bit more research and quickly discovered that just wasn't borne out. There didn't really seem to be any connection at all. What we had here is an instance of mere correlation. So I sort of told you, right? The lighter jerseys don't cause the team to win. Being the home team wins. Or, yeah, causes a higher percentage of victory. And in your answers, people did pretty well with this question by and large, from what I was seeing so far, at least. Yeah, in your answers, you could sort of go into all the specific reasons why might the home team be more likely to win. Maybe you don't have to travel. It means the crowd is cheering for you. And various things like that sort of, and people gave a lot of different answers, and they were all more or less fine, right? Those things make the home team more likely to win. And since the home team happens to wear light jerseys, There just happens to be a correlation in this case. But it's just a happenstance. If the home teams happen to wear darker jerseys, then the teams with the darker jerseys would be more likely to win. So there is indeed a correlation. They go together. Wearing the light jersey goes together with being more likely to win, but it's not an actual causal relationship. The actual causal relationship is something else. And like I said, by and large, everything I was seeing on that second question looked pretty good. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts about that problem? All right, awesome. Let's go on to the third one. So the third one, I was asking you to look at an Occam's razor. And this was another case where, again, what frequently people were saying was fine or in the right general ballpark, but I just needed to see more. People didn't go into enough details on it. All right. So I told you this argument violates Occam's razor. All right. So you have to sort of explain why it does, and I needed you to be specific. You couldn't just say it prefers a more complicated explanation, because that's just what it means to violate Occam's razor. I needed to sort of know specifically why. What was the simpler explanation? Maybe is another way of putting it. So what's our case? We've got a massive conspiracy at the highest levels of government to hide the existence of aliens. Why? Because we know for sure that government agencies investigated UFO reports in the 1960s. This is indeed true. It's called Project Blue Book. Despite these investigations, the government has never admitted the existence of aliens. Again, this is the case. Project Blue Book reached no firm conclusions. The obvious reason for this failure? A massive, widespread conspiracy to hide, presumably, the existence of aliens. Could the government hiding the existence of aliens explain why they didn't report the existence of aliens? Sure. It is indeed a credible cause. It's the sort of thing that could explain why the government didn't report anything. And it fits the data, right? What's the data that we have, at least right now? The data we have right now is that the government didn't report anything. It fits the data then. But there are simpler explanations that fit the data equally well. A lot of people said, what might here one example, aliens don't exist. And indeed, yeah, that explanation would also fit the data equally well and is probably slightly simpler. Here's an even simpler one, though. They just didn't find any aliens. The reason I say this explanation is even simpler is because it actually involves even less assumptions that aliens don't exist. If you look for a bunch of aliens and don't find any, maybe aliens still exist, but you just didn't find any, right? You have to make an additional leap, an additional assumption to go to aliens not existing. If all you say is that you just didn't find any aliens, that's even a simpler explanation that fits all the data, right? This involves a lot less assumptions than the existence of some widespread, massive conspiracy. And I'm sorry for all of you alien buffs out there, but Edward Snowden, who was the guy who did a bunch of the leaks about US military surveillance, he said that one of the things he did was he was sort of poking around for evidence of aliens and he didn't find any. So I'm sorry, it just seems as if that the government didn't really find any evidence as a result of Project Blue Book in the 60s. And again, what I needed to see here, I needed something just really specific. In particular, what was the simpler explanation and an account of why it's simpler. So that's, if you missed any points in that problem, that's probably why. You probably just needed to say a little bit more. The general structure of the answers people were giving were all right for this question. Any other questions for this one? All right. Let's go to number 4. And number 4, it's going to be worth talking about a little bit of detail, because we should go over what a contributory cause means again, because people weren't getting it exactly right in their answers. All right. So I tell you, coming to my office hours is a contributory cause of doing well. Students who come to my office hours and went over the material with me before the exam scored an average 12% higher than they did in the previous exam. And that's about true. Varies by the class. It's not always 12%. Sometimes it's a little bit less, but sometimes indeed it is that high. So why is this a contributory cause? What does it mean for something to be a contributory cause at all? That's a place to start. It's one that makes the effect more likely to happen. But it doesn't actually ensure that it will happen. I.e., it's not a sufficient cause. All right. So what I needed to see from this answer is basically that. Why does studying for the exam not ensure that you'll get an A? And indeed, or even get a good grade at all. And it just doesn't. Unfortunately, and it really is unfortunate, I wish this wasn't true, lots of people study really hard and still don't do well. And I wish this was not the case, but unfortunately, it kind of just happens to be the case. Some people study really hard and still don't do well. And the opposite is true as too. And some people don't study hard and do fine. Right? Effort just isn't enough. So why would coming to my office hours be a contributory cause? Well, it seems like coming to my office hours is sort of contributory to studying. It's sort of part and parcel of this activity of studying really hard. But studying really hard just isn't enough to ensure it. There are some people with some topics who can study really, really hard, really put in earnest effort, and still not do as well as they would like. Conversely, there are people who don't put in any effort at all, and in some topics do really well. That's the part that I was really looking here. That's the key for why it's a contributory cause. It makes it more likely you'll get a good grade. And again, we can even quantify exactly how much more likely is it, but that's not certainty. That doesn't ensure you'll get a better grade. It just increases the odds of you doing so. And that's what I really needed to see with this talk of contributory causes. So any questions about that? Because this was probably the question people sort of were giving the least solid answers on. So does anyone have any additional questions on this idea of a contributory cause, or anything else they'd like to go over about it? All right, then let's go over the last one, and then we'll do the quiz that was due today, and then we'll start doing some new material after that. So the last one, I actually asked you to reach a causal conclusion. And from what I could see, everyone was doing this more or less right. Again, it was sort of just a question of how to describe it if you didn't get full points on it. But the basic structure of the answers I was seeing from people looked pretty good. It looked like everyone seemed to be on the right track as far as I could see. All right. So you were asked in this problem to actually determine what the best available explanation is. Right? And so you should have sort of gone through the 5 criteria, though I actually told you in this case, you don't even really need to go through the first 3 criteria. Some people did, but I sort of just told you that it satisfied all 3 of them. You could take my sort of word for it, but we could also talk our way through it and see why it satisfies all of them. All right. So what your task was, you got these 3 hypothesized causes, these 3 candidates. You had to pick the best one. So since I told you that the first 3 were satisfied, so you could have just started right with the 4th criteria. And all right, what's the 4th criteria? Do all these explanations fit the data equally well? Right? And what is the data in this case? Let's specify that out. The data is 1, my car won't start, and 2, my car's radio won't start. That's the data. Those are the facts available to me. Which of these 3 explanations fit those facts? All right. Well, 2 fits both. Right? If indeed there's a problem with the electrical wiring in the car, that will indeed explain why the car won't start, and it will explain why the car's radio won't start. So does 3. 3 also fits both. If someone installed a virus in my car, and it's just it's anything resembling a modern car, so a car built in the last 15 years, say, right? The computer systems in cars control everything. So if indeed my car has some kind of computer virus within it, that could explain indeed both why the radio doesn't work and why the car won't start. But one doesn't fit the both facts. One does fit it, why the car's not starting, right? If the engine's dead, that would indeed explain why the car won't start. But the engine should have nothing to do with whether or not the radio actually turns on. The radio just should turn on if the battery is working. And indeed, you're told that the battery is working. So we can add that as one of the facts. And so as a result of the 4th criteria, we can cross off number 1. So I've got 2 left using that 4th criteria. So now I'll need to go on to the 5th. Occam's razor. Which is simpler, 2 or 3? And in this case, 2 seems to pretty obviously be simpler. I have to make a lot of assumptions about people hacking into my car that just aren't. I don't have to make that the data doesn't support. But again, it's important. It is credible, a credible cause 3. 3 is the kind of thing that could make my car not work. It's just I have no reason to believe that anyone did that, right? And so therefore, I have to make a whole bunch of assumptions like someone hacked into my car without me noticing and installed a computer virus. That's an assumption, whereas the assumption that something's wrong with the wiring, that's a lot simpler. There's a lot less steps involved in that. 2 seems to be obviously simpler, so it's the best available explanation. And again, if you went through all 5 of the causal criteria, that was fine. Yeah, I wasn't really bothered by that. Any questions about any of those? Again, for that last question, it seemed like everyone was more or less giving the right structure to the answer. You were all thinking in the right basic direction. So it was just a question of if you lost a few points on it. It was just how you were putting a point or how you were wording something. But it seemed like people were more or less on the right track with that last one. So any questions on any of that group work or any part of that group activity you had to do? All right, let's go over the quiz then real fast. And then we'll start some new stuff. All right, here we go. So I hope we have some murder mystery fans in the room. First question, you were asked to sort of explain whether or not this particular argument by the police has violated Occam's razor. And so this is what's called a closed room killing. And it's where you find a body in a place where it doesn't seem like the killer could have escaped from. And that's the way this sort of scenario is set up, right? We've got a woman found dead inside a locked room, right? She was stabbed, right? and the police concluded that it had to have been a crazy, outlandish accident, right? That she was in her kitchen, tripped, fell over, knife flew through the air, and just accidentally stabbed her, right? Sort of a Final Destination movie type disaster, a Rube Goldberg type disaster, right? Now, okay, is that unlikely? Indeed, yes, it is. It's sort of an outlandish sequence of events. Is it possible, though? Yes, it is. The police's explanation is also possible. Right? So we satisfy the third criteria. This is a credible cause. It's the kind of thing that could indeed work. Does the police's explanation fit the data? Yes, it does. It indeed does fit the data. Is there a better explanation that fits the data? No, there doesn't seem to be. We know all the doors and windows were locked on the inside. So if there had been a murderer, right, the murderer would have had to have killed the person, left the built room, and then somehow locked the doors from the inside when they were not present in the room. Right? The doors and windows were all locked from the inside. They couldn't have entered or escaped the room. There doesn't actually seem to be an, and indeed, I guess we have to assume for the sake of argument that the killer actually isn't still in the room, but I assume the police would have found that if the person was still present in the house in some sense. So there isn't any other more obvious explanation. So despite how outlandish this conclusion is, it actually doesn't seem to violate Occam's razor. You'd need to find a simpler explanation. And actually, past times that I've given this answer, some people who also enjoyed the occasional murder mystery, I could tell, some people did actually try to offer a simpler explanation. And if you did, if that's the route you took in your answer, you're fine. If you do propose a simpler explanation that fits the data equally well, that's fine. I had no objection to it, right? But your explanation, it has to fit all the facts. It has to fit the fact that the doors and windows were locked from the inside. If your explanation doesn't fit those facts, it's not going to be good enough. But if you did come up with a simpler explanation, you're fine. All right. So someone said, what about a suicide? Yep, indeed, if you suggested that as a simpler explanation, this is from the chat. Sure, I'm fine with that one. Again, let me go back to that screen for a second. That would work as an answer if you said it was suicide. I mean, again, I was sort of assuming the police would have been able to figure that one out. But if you maybe consider that, I didn't actually make that really explicit in the question. So if you were considering the possibility that there's a suicide, and a suicide indeed is quite simpler than I tripped and fell and the knife flew through the air and all that, sure, that one definitely works. There's also a hand up, so you should be good, Katie. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask about the whole suicide, because I said that it would be more plausible for a suicide. So it was answered. And I chatted you, but that was the same thing. So
that's fine. That is fine. Yeah, and indeed, I think that's good, right? Because, yeah, I mean, some people got really elaborate, actually, in past times of teaching the class with more elaborate answers. Some people were like, well, maybe the killer, is hiding in a vent, so you can't, see him explicitly or whatever, and, all the fun murder mystery stuff. And that's fine. What this question was really just testing is how well you actually understand Occam's razor. It's not a likely explanation, it's the most likely given all the evidence available. So if you think it violates Occam's razor, you've got to give a simpler explanation. And if you say suicide, like you were saying, that does it. That would count as a simpler explanation. Good.
Perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely. And did I have another chat question? Oh, no, looks like the person got it. All right, good. So any other questions on this first one? What I'm really looking for is either there is no simpler explanation, or what would the simpler explanation be? That's what I was looking for in this case. Any other questions about it? All right, good. Let's go on to the next one. Hold on a second. Let me make it visible for you all. Share the screen. There we go. All right. So here you're just asked to use all 5 criteria to again determine the best available explanation. Okay. So famous author has, I was sort of if you're any Game of Thrones fans in the audience, has still not finished his award-winning fan favorite fantasy series. Why is he not finished? So you're supposed to go through the 5 criteria. So here are the causes that are hypothesized in the arguments. Right. We've got, he doesn't care about writing anymore. Only TV shows. Other things, possibilities, he doesn't care about fantasy anymore. Another candidate, he only cares about fan adoration. And the other one, he's busy. So here's our list of hypothesized causes, and then what we should do, just go step by step through all 4 causes and cross them off as we go. So criteria 1, would all of these be correlated? All of these would indeed be correlated with not writing. They would go together with not writing. So none of them are ridiculous. Criteria 2, all of these would indeed have come before not writing, so it works in that regard. So it satisfies the second one. Are all of these credible? Would all of these be plausible reasons for a person to not write a novel? I suppose so. Right, so they satisfy the third criteria. And remember, this first 3 criteria should just be getting rid of sort of ridiculous things. If one of these had been, I don't know, he's been possessed by aliens. All right, that we can get rid of via the third criteria. All right, get rid of that one by the third criteria. That is simply not the sort of thing that we think is an explanation for why someone doesn't write novels. So now we're at the good ones. 4. Do all of these fit the data equally well? And my claim is actually they don't. Only one of these fits the data reasonably well. He doesn't care about writing books anymore. That's not true, since he recently wrote a crime novel. So we can discount this one. Right? Doesn't work, doesn't fit. He actually did indeed write a novel. He doesn't care about fantasy anymore. That's not true, because the TV series is a fantasy TV series. And the conferences are fantasy conferences. So that one doesn't work. Maybe he only cares about fan adoration. Well, that's not true, because he's working on this TV series and he wrote this crime novel. So he is indeed working on stuff, not just going to conferences. So that one doesn't work. The only one left, the only remaining explanation is that he's too busy. And indeed, being busy fits the data really well. What's he busy with? Well, he's busy with working on TV shows, writing crime novels, and going to conferences. That indeed would keep him busy. That last one fits the data better than all of the others. And so that's the best available explanation. I don't even need to go on to ask about Occam's razor, because that's only relevant if I have multiple equally good explanations, multiple explanations that fit the data equally well. And in this case, once we sort of cross things off, the only one left that's a good candidate is the last one. So we don't need to keep going. Occam's razor is sort of like a last resort kind of situation. Occam's razor is where if you have multiple good candidates, how do I decide between those multiple good candidates? All right. So any questions about anything from the quiz, or maybe questions from any of the homework problems? Overall, people seem to be feeling okay with these causal arguments. Like I said, I haven't seen anything particularly egregious or any egregious misunderstandings. So I think we'll start moving on to appeals to authority. We'll do a little bit on it today. But if anyone is a little bit unclear about anything with these causal arguments, please come to my office hours or make an appointment with me, and I'd be happy to go over anything you'd like to a little bit more. So let's start appeals to authority. And today we're just going to do some setup and some background on these. We won't actually probably start going through any of the criteria, but I just want to we'll just do some initial background. These are an incredibly important form of argumentation. Let me tell you all a story, and it's a funny story. When I was young, my family would go to the beach, right? And my dad, who had a little, little cruel streak, not in a bad way, just like to make fun and tease us kids. He told me and my sisters that dragonflies, because the beach had a lot of dragonflies on it. He told us we had to be really careful of dragonflies, because if you've ever seen a dragonfly, right, they got a super long little tail at the end of it. He said that they had a needle at the end of their long little tail, and that they would come up and sew our lips shut if we got too close to one of them. So how did my sister and I react? We were what? I was probably like 7, so my sisters were even younger than me, because I'm the oldest. We all freaked out. We all got sort of horrified and terrified, right? And my dad was just playing a joke on us, right? It wasn't any sort of big deal. But to this day, I'm like, I'm 35 now. So you mean 30 years later, nearly 30 years later, I still get a little bit freaked out when I see a dragonfly. Of course, now I know that what I was told by my dad in that case wasn't true, right? That it wasn't a good piece of information, but nevertheless, just hearing it at a young age, I still am a little bit freaked out about dragonflies, even though dragonflies are completely harmless. And I've actually asked my sisters about this, and they all both say the same thing. They both actually say they're still a little bit freaked out by them too. We take what we hear from other people incredibly seriously. And most of what we know about the world, we know about it because we heard it from other people. Have any of you been to Kazakhstan? You probably believe Kazakhstan exists. Why? Because other people told you. It'd be one thing if you had gone there and visited yourself, but I've never been there, at least. My belief in Kazakhstan and everything that I believe about Kazakhstan is secondhand. I believe things about Kazakhstan because people have told me things about Kazakhstan. And I believe things about, okay, let's get more important, because probably my beliefs about Kazakhstan and dragonflies probably don't matter a great deal. But my beliefs about vaccines. I don't know why vaccines work. I can give you like a sort of explanation, I guess, right? But my explanation is going to be really superficial. I'm not actually a medical doctor. I don't actually know. My beliefs about vaccines come from having been told by other people what to believe about those vaccines. Again, I try to put that really broadly, right? Because indeed, both people who think vaccines are good and that vaccines are important, and people who believe that vaccines are dangerous, both groups, unless they're doctors, and probably there are not really many doctors in the second group, unless you're a doctor, your belief is formed on the basis of what you've heard from other people. Okay? I am simply not competent enough to actually go and study what it is vaccines do and how they work. I'm not actually a doctor. I don't possess the necessary background and necessary information that I would need to reach a determination about that question. That's a scenario where I am forced to rely on what I hear from others. Right? What's important then is finding the right other. Right? If I believe random things that I read on the internet, I'm potentially in quite a bit of danger, right? Because random things on the internet might be poorly formed, that might not be a solid foundation to form my beliefs. It might be like listening to my dad when he was talking about the dragonflies. Conversely, if I get my information from reliable sources, I really am likely to have a true belief on the basis of what I hear from other people. So let's start talking about what I mean by an appeal to an authority. It's an argument that has roughly this form. You should believe that something is true because some expert or authority says that it's true. Now, it's important to note here, right? When I'm giving an appeal to authority, I'm basically saying, take my word for it. And indeed, maybe it's not my word, but at least take someone's word for it. And so this is very different than a lot of the other kinds of arguments that we've looked at, right? Normally when we look at arguments, for example, these causal arguments, right? The reasons that I'm giving are reasons about the subject matter, right? So when we were talking about why it was the car broken, why won't the car start, right? The evidence that I'm giving in support of the claim that the car doesn't start because there's a problem with the wiring is really just evidence about the car. It's evidence about the topic. The evidence in the case of an appeal to authority isn't really evidence about the topic. It's evidence about who an expert is. Loosely speaking, what's going to make one of these appeals to authority a good argument is if the person who is being appealed to really is a reliable expert or an authority. If they are, the fact that an expert or authority says that something is true, that gives me a good reason to believe that it's true. Not a certain reason. These are inductive arguments still. Experts can indeed be wrong about things, even really good, competent, qualified experts. It is possible for an expert to be wrong about something, but the expert is way more likely to get it right than some random person on the streets. Again, remember, with these inductive arguments, all of them are sort of probabilistic in some sense. It's not that the conclusion is certain, it's that I have a good reason to think that the conclusion is true. The expert is way more likely to get it right than the non-expert. So what we'll need to really talk about as we sort of go through this is what makes someone count as a good expert. All right. So I sort of suggested that this is probably the most important kind of argument that we're going to talk about this semester, and I think it really is. So, okay, let's get. I mean, we can use some really concrete examples of why this matters so much, right? So all of us are locked down in quarantines, or at least probably most of you are. Anyway, there are a few states that don't, but probably most of you are locked down in a quarantine. When should that quarantine be lifted? Well, I have no idea. I am not an expert in medicine and medical matters, right? I don't know when the quarantine should or should not be lifted. Who would know? Medical experts, presumably, right? Medical experts are the people who would know. Now, all of us are hearing all kinds of people giving all kinds of opinions about when this quarantine should be lifted. And most of us are indeed not doctors. Most of us don't actually know. So we're in a position where we sort of will just need to take the expert's word on it. The problem is competing experts, or at least competing people claiming to be experts. How can we decide between them without being experts ourselves? Because I'm not a medical doctor. I actually don't know how to evaluate the quarantine data. I've got a bunch of people claiming to be experts telling me to do various things. How do I pick out which ones of those people talking should I believe and which ones shouldn't? It'd be one thing if I was a doctor, right? Like the sort of the complication here, if I was actually a doctor, it would be easy. If I was actually a doctor, I would know exactly who to listen to because I wouldn't need to listen to anyone. I would actually know the answer. If we're not actually doctors, though, we don't know the answer. We have to rely on people. But there are all kinds of people claiming to be experts who are not. So all of us are in a really difficult situation. We have to decide sort of who the experts are without ourselves being experts. And this is not easy. I'm not gonna, I mean, that's why we're gonna spend some time on it. And even there, I'm not gonna be able to give you hard and fast rules here because this is indeed a serious difficulty. You've all probably heard talk about fake news. This has been sort of the buzzword of the last 4 years or 3 years or 5 years. I don't know however long we want to drop back to. And I'm going to talk about this more when we do the second half of chapter 6, but I actually think fake news is sort of a misleading way of characterizing the problem. The problem, fake news just suggests people are saying false things. And that's not new. Like people have said false things for a very long time. We'll go over some examples maybe either later on in this week or early next week, right? Wars have been started as a result of people making up stuff. I mean, people make up stuff all the time. That's not new. That's not per se the problem. I think what people are pointing toward when they're talking about the problem of fake news is more of a crisis in expertise. For right now, this is just a suggestion, so don't take this as I'll need to justify this claim later. But my suggestion, this problem of fake news that you hear people talking about is really a crisis about expertise. Or at the very least, we can't agree on who to rely. Who counts as an expert, right? And I'll just end with this, another example. The book goes through this example of vaccines, right? And it's a good example because, again, there just is no evidence that vaccines are linked to autism. There just really isn't any evidence to that effect. But people don't trust, at least some people, like the anti-vaccine crowd, does not trust the expertise of doctors. And if you don't indeed trust the expertise of doctors, well, then why would you trust doctors when they say there's no evidence that vaccines cause evidence, right? If you don't trust them as experts, you've really got a problem, actually, right? Conversely, all the people who do indeed trust doctors, right, they literally can't agree on who to listen to. Similarly with news sources, if you can't agree about what an authoritative news source is, then yeah, we've got a pretty serious problem. We're not going to agree about what facts we should accept and what facts we shouldn't accept. Another example of this is one I'll end with, and we'll talk more about this example as we go because it's a really strong one in this context. The most relevant experts in the field of climate science overwhelmingly agree that global warming is caused by human factors. It's actually it's insane. If you actually just do a poll of climate scientists, more climate scientists agree that human beings are responsible for global warming than doctors agree that antibiotics work on bacteria. It's like something like 98% of climate scientists agree on global warming, and only like 93. This is a while ago, so it might have changed. But last I saw, something like only like 95% of doctors agree about that antibiotics work. So the quote-unquote experts in the field are overwhelmingly in agreement that global warming is caused by human factors. But if you don't trust those experts, right? If you say those people claiming to be experts really are not, whereas other people say, no, we should listen to those experts, that's what I think people are really pointing toward when they're talking about this fake news. We can't agree what sources of information to trust, what sources of information to rely upon or take seriously. And so what we're going to do for the next little bit, we're going to try to begin to develop some resources that we can use to figure out what sources of authority can we trust, what sources of authority can't trust. Because unfortunately, we don't have a choice. We are going to need to trust some experts. We're going to have to use arguments of this sort. And so figuring out how to use arguments of this sort as well as possible, that's what we're going to spend the next little bit on. That's going to be our goal. All right. So next time, we'll try to go through a list of criteria for evaluating these authority claims. That's what we'll sort of pick up with this. So we'll begin and continue with Wednesday, going through the chapter 5. There won't be any homework or quiz or anything for Wednesday. Have a great day, and I will talk to all of you later. If anyone wants to stop by my office hours, you can just stay here or pop in later. I'll try to leave this Zoom room open. Thank you all very much.